The studio lights weren't just bright, they were surgical. Cold beams slicing through the darkened CNN auditorium, exposing every wrinkle, every twitch, every unspoken thought sitting between two titans of American culture. The night had been billed as a landmark event, a special CNN town hall on criminal justice reform, a conversation, they said, civil, enlightening, necessary. But no one was prepared for what actually unfolded. On one side of the polished stage, Judge Judith Sheindlin, better known to millions as Judge Judy, no robe tonight, but still wrapped in that indelible aura of authority. At 81, she was as steely as ever, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Her crossed arms signaled control, her jawline firm. America's courtroom matriarch had come ready to speak truth, her truth honed by decades on the bench, unyielding and unsentimental. On the other side, Denzel Washington. No scripts, no spotlights this time, just presence. Leaning slightly forward in his seat, brows knitted, hands folded, the way only someone deeply familiar with both pain and patience can sit, he wasn't there as a celebrity, not as an Oscar-winning actor. He was there as a witness, as a father, as a black man in America. And in that tension between law and lived experience, between order and empathy, history began to unfold. It started small. A question from Anderson Cooper, seated between them like a referee bracing for impact. Judge Sheindlin, you've spoken about the importance of accountability in the justice system. What does that mean in the context of reform? Judy leaned forward, her voice clipped but clear. It means we don't abandon consequence in the name of compassion. Reform doesn't mean softening. It means improving outcomes. But consequences, those must remain. That's what justice is. She spoke like a verdict. Final case closed. Denzel waited. Not fidgeting, not smiling. Then, consequences matter. But so does context. And if justice is blind, why does it keep tripping over the same communities? The audience stirred. That low buzz of tension flickered like a storm building behind glass dot. Judy replied quickly. Too quickly, because those communities commit more crime. That's not bias, that's data. A pause, then came the first shift. Denzel's gaze didn't break. He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it. That data tells a story, Judge, but you ever wonder who wrote it? The silence was sudden. It spread like ice. Cameras zoomed in. Anderson glanced sideways, unsure if he should move on or buckle in. Judy blinked once, slowly, then fired back. Young man, I've presided over 20,000 cases. I've seen the difference between excuses and accountability. And I've spent 30 years meeting the people behind those cases, Denzel replied, calm as marble. The difference between a mistake and a record is often just a zip code. It wasn't a zinger. It was a scalpel, and it cut deep. The audience was caught between breaths. Judge Judy stiffened. You don't get to rewrite justice because it makes you uncomfortable, she said, her tone tightening. I'm not rewriting it, Denzel said. I'm reminding you it's always been incomplete. It was subtle, but it was happening. The room was leaning, not away from Judy, not yet, but toward something deeper in Denzel. A bravery, a presence. Anderson tried to steer. Let's talk about mandatory minimums. Denzel, you've been vocal about their racial disparities. Can you expand? Denzel nodded, turning his attention to the camera, the country. We've created laws that pretend to be neutral but fall with precision. Mandatory minimums weren't a mistake. They were a message. And that message was, you break the law in certain neighborhoods, you get buried. You do it in others. You get rehab. That's not justice. That's policy with a zip code. Judge Judy exhaled. Not in defeat, in fire. You make it sound like the system is out hunting black kids. That's irresponsible. It's not hunting, replied. It's filtering quietly, consistently, and profitably. Judy straightened her back, tilting her head as if preparing for battle. Justice is blind, Mr. Washington. No, Judge, Denzel said, his voice barely above a whisper, but now steeped in something cold and ancient. Justice has cataracts. A gasp echoed across the audience. A woman in the third row clutched her mouth. A producer backstage mouthed cut, but the director shook his head. This was live, and this was lightning. The conversation pivoted, but not the tension. Anderson posed a question about rehabilitation programs in prisons. But the issue wasn't just policy now. It was personal. You could feel it. Judge Judy tried to reclaim the ground. I've sentenced people from every race, every background. Justice is about choices, not skin color. Good choices get rewarded. Bad ones get punished. That's the way it works. Denzel looked up, his jaw locked, not in anger, but in resolve. Let me ask you something, Judge, he said. Why do you think the same communities keep coming through your courtroom? Over and over again, do you think it's genetics, culture, or maybe ... Maybe it's that we never gave them a shot to begin with. Judy leaned back, but her jaw was tense, because some people break the law more. That's not racism. That's reality. Now the air changed. You could almost hear it hum. No, Judge Denzel said. That's systemic failure, repackaged as fact. You saw the behavior. I saw the pattern. And patterns don't lie. It wasn't an argument anymore. It was a shift in orbit. Anderson, caught in the eye of it all, tried to ask another question, but it was too late. The floor had tilted. Denzel on flinching.com continued. You built a career turning pain into spectacle. That courtroom show, that wasn't justice. That was ratings. You told poor people their lives were entertainment. And now you want to be the voice of fairness. The silence was nuclear. Judge Judy's hands tensed. Her lips parted, but no rebuttal came. I respect your years, Denzel said, eyes fixed on her. But experience isn't wisdom unless it evolves. That was the moment. A camera light blinked. A studio. Hand dropped his clipboard, and the audience, stunned, remained still, not because of volume, but because they had just witnessed the beginning of a reckoning. The air in the CNN town hall was no longer oxygen. It was tension, thick, still, electric. It hung from the ceiling like a storm cloud waiting for thunder. Every breath from the live audience was shallow, measured the way people breathe when they sense history isn't being remembered, but made in real time. And right now, that history was unfolding between a woman who had spent her life commanding order and a man who just weaponized quiet truth into something louder than any gavel slam. Judge Judy sat stiff, her knuckles white against the table's edge. Across, his presence filled the room without flailing. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to reveal something, and the revelation was working. Anderson Cooper, visibly rattled, cleared his throat. We've clearly entered a powerful space tonight, he said, attempting to lighten the mood with journalistic diplomacy. Let's talk solutions. If the system is broken, how do we fix it? Judge Shindlin, Judy jumped at the chance. We begin by reestablishing respect, she said sharply. For law, for process, for consequence. I don't care what neighborhood you're from. If you break the law, you pay the price. That's how society survives. She looked to the audience, searching for familiar nods of agreement. Some gave it, but others, especially younger faces, didn't move. What we don't do, she continued, is redefine justice to coddle criminals. This new wave of reformers, they want empathy where there should be action. They want analysis where there should be accountability. That's not progress. That's paralysis. She shot a glance at Denzel. It wasn't subtle. He leaned in, his elbows resting on the table now. Respect, he said slowly, is earned. And systems that repeatedly show bias don't earn respect. They lose it. Are you calling the justice system racist? Judy snapped. I'm saying the outcomes speak for themselves. That wasn't rhetoric. That was fact, wrapped in lived memory. Let's talk about kids getting 20 years for stealing a phone, while Wall Street execs who destroyed pensions retire with golden parachutes. A low murmur rippled through the audience. A few claps, a whistle. Judge Judy turned on them like a teacher scolding a classroom. They're applauding someone finally calling out the imbalance. And then, as if someone had cracked open a vault of buried questions, the momentum shifted again. Anderson leaned forward. Judge Shindlin, Denzel raises the issue of sentencing disparity. Black Americans serve longer sentences than white Americans for the same crimes. How do you explain that? Judy bristled. I don't explain it. I reject the premise. Denzel blinked quietly. The premise, he said softly, is built on data from your own system. She shot back. Data can be twisted. I trusted. My eyes, my gut. Then your gut needs a better history book. Denzel replied. That one hit. The crowd erupted. Applause, gasps, cheers. But Denzel wasn't grandstanding. He didn't smile, he didn't flinch. He waited for the noise to settle, then continued, this time turning his body fully toward Judy. You believe justice is a clean formula. Break a law, do the time. But you ignored the equation before. The crime, the school system, the housing, the profiling, the redlining. You see the explosion, but never ask who lit the fuse. She started to interrupt. Let me finish, he said, his voice still low. You say you've sentenced people from every walk of life. So tell me, why are certain people sentenced harsher for the same crime? Judy opened her mouth, closed it. He didn't stop. You want accountability? So do I. Let's hold lawmakers accountable for laws written to target poverty. Let's hold judges accountable for implicit bias. Let's hold a system accountable that spends more on prisons than education. The audience was no longer quiet. It was alive, clapping, murmuring, whispering. Phones were raised, already recording. They knew, everyone knew, this was no longer a town hall. This was a cultural referendum. Judy shook her head. I can't believe this, she muttered. You come in here and act like I'm the villain? I didn't say that, Denzel replied. But when a system creates victims, someone's hands are on the levers. She stood suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to rattle. Anderson froze. Let me tell you something, Mr. Washington, she said, standing tall, arms crossed. I've put murderers behind bars, child abusers, rapists. I've protected communities. I've done more real justice than you ever will. Denzel looked up at her. His voice didn't rise. And I've walked into those same communities after the cameras left. After the press stopped caring, after the justice you handed out ripped fathers from families, after your version of protection became generational trauma. You don't know what I've seen. No, Denzel said, but I know what you didn't. Not humiliated, but unsettled, because for the first time, she wasn't in control. Anderson finally broke the silence. Let's pivot. Denzel, what does reform actually look like to you? Denzel didn't rush. He turned to the crowd, to the camera, to the country. It looks like redemption. It looks like reentry. It looks like replacing prison beds with mental health beds. It looks like a justice system that sees people, not just paperwork. It looks like truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. And it looks like this, he added, gesturing between himself and Judy, two people from different worlds, saying the hard things out loud. That's the start. The lights didn't get brighter, but somehow the room did. And in the audience, a teenager stood and clapped. Then another, and another, until the studio wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a witness box for the nation. When CNN returned from commercial break, something was different. Not the set, not the lighting, not the two icons seated at opposite ends of the long glass table. No, something in the atmosphere had changed. Something irreversible. The audience wasn't just observing anymore. They were invested, and not the polite daytime television kind of investment. This wasn't a studio crowd clapping for pre-approved talking points. This was a room filled with people who now understood they were watching a reckoning. Judge Judy adjusted her blazer. Her composure was mostly back, but there was a crack in the foundation, barely visible, but unmistakable. Her jaw clenched with each breath. The woman who'd once barked entire courtrooms into submission now found herself navigating silence. Denzel Washington hadn't moved much, but his silence, unlike hers, wasn't defensive. It was strategy. It was the silence of a man who knows the next sentence needs no rush, because truth never panics. Anderson Cooper, aware now that he wasn't hosting a discussion, but refereeing history, looked between them like a man caught in the crossfire of two tectonic plates. We're getting a lot of reactions online, he said, his voice a little less polished now. This town hall is already being called one of the most candid conversations about justice we've ever aired live. Judge Judy smiled thinly. Candid is one word for it, she muttered. Denzel turned his head slowly. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't retaliate. He studied her like a man reading a verdict before issuing one, and then, calmly, "You know what the problem is with candid conversations?" he asked. "They reveal more than what's said." The audience leaned in. Judy did not respond. They reveal how people listen, how they filter discomfort, how quickly they pivot from statistics to anecdotes, from facts to feelings. He looked at her, not with anger, but with something heavier: history. You said earlier, "I've spent my life in Hollywood," he continued. You said you've dealt with real people, real criminals, real pain. He paused. So let me tell you about some of my real people. A hush fell. This wasn't monologue. This was memory. When I was 15, my best friend's brother got picked up by cops in Mount Vernon, caught with weed. First offense? No violence, no priors. He spent 2 years at Rikers. Came back a different person, not because he was reformed, because he was broken. Denzel's eyes shimmered, but not with tears. With focus. You think I learned empathy from Scrumps? I learned it from watching mothers weep in front of locked cell doors. I learned it from seeing what it looks like when a young man comes home and doesn't know who he is anymore. Judy sat still. You call it crime. I call it context. I call it cycles. I call it trauma dressed up in orange jumpsuits. Anderson looked shaken. He wanted to move on, but the audience wouldn't let him. They were with Denzel now, not as fans, but as witnesses. A young woman in the front row, late 20s, eyes heavy with lived experience, stood up. No mic, just voice. My brother did 10 years for stealing. A car came out. He couldn't get a job. Couldn't rent an apartment. We lost him last year. Suicide. Is that what justice looks like? The room froze. Judge Judy's eyes flickered. No snark. No rebuttal, just silence. And then Denzel stood. Not all the way, just enough that his voice could fill the room without force. What you just heard, he said, gesturing toward the woman, is the aftershock. The echo no one measures. The kind that doesn't show up in crime stats. You want to reduce repeat offenses. Start by reducing the reasons people lose hope. Another voice from the crowd. What about victims? The question came from an older man, crisp suit, former NYPD, if you had to guess. His voice was firm, not hostile, just ... Tired, Denzel nodded. You're right to ask, because victims matter. Their pain is real. But here's the mistake we make. We act like justice can only go one way. He turned to Judge Judy again. You've always said your courtroom was about resolution, but punishment isn't always resolution. Sometimes it's just a bandage over a bullet wound. And then, suddenly, Judy spoke. So what's your answer, Denzel? Just let people walk. No prisons, no sentencing. You want to turn justice into therapy? He didn't flinch. No, he said. I want us to stop calling punishment the only form of justice we're allowed to imagine. The line landed like a sermon. The audience stirred. Even Cooper nodded. Slightly, but Judy wasn't done. You're good with words, she said, quieter now. But what happens when words aren't enough? When someone's been assaulted? When a child's been hurt? You can't talk that pain away. Denzel looked down, and then he said something no one expected. My mother was assaulted. Gasps. I was 12, Denzel continued, eyes distant now. I didn't understand it all then, but I remembered the look on her face, the way the world changed after. I remember wanting someone to pay for it. He took a breath, but what helped her wasn't sentencing. It was support. It was community. It was someone helping her feel whole again. Justice didn't come from punishment. It came from healing. There it was, not debate, testimony. Judge Judy blinked hard. For the first time, her face softened. Anderson whispered into his mic, "We'll be right back." But the studio feed kept rolling. And online, the internet erupted. Live tweets, breaking headlines. Clip after clip. Denzel, my mother was assaulted. What helped wasn't punishment, it was healing. 3.2 million views in 20 minutes. Hashtag Justice is Healing. Hashtag Denzel Town Hall. Hashtag Redefining Justice. A side-by-side photo emerged on Instagram. One half Judy mid, other half Denzel hand over his heart. Caption: Order versus understanding. TikTok duets flooded the feed. Young public defenders, ex-inmates, trauma therapists, each one stitching Denzel's words with their own stories. He spoke for U.S., said one former Rikers inmate. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He told the truth. Meanwhile, networks scrambled. MSNBC ran the Chiron, Hollywood versus the gavel. Who defines justice now? Fox News. More cautious. Denzel sparks controversy over punishment versus healing comments. But the cultural shift wasn't political, it was personal. Judge Judy's longtime producer, off-camera but mic'd, whispered to the control booth, "This might be the moment we pass the torch." Anderson returned from commercial, barely holding it together. "We have about 15 minutes left," he said. "I'd like to end on what each of you believes America must do right. Now, to restore faith in our system." Judy didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier, but different. "I don't agree with everything said tonight," she began, "but I hear it. I do. I've spent my career valuing law and order. Maybe I didn't spend enough time valuing why people broke the law in the first place." Denzel didn't gloat, didn't smile. He just nodded, slowly. And then he looked at her. No fire now, just a glimmer of shared gravity. "That," he said, "is where reform begins." And then came the applause. Not the kind that erupts from scripted endings or cue cards. This wasn't theater anymore. This was raw, earned, delayed by shock, fueled by recognition. It started as a slow ripple, a few hesitant claps near the, back then more, from the front, and suddenly a standing ovation, not for performance, for presence. Denzel Washington didn't smile. He simply lowered his head slightly, like a man accepting not praise, but acknowledgement. A truth had been spoken. And people weren't just listening, they were changing. Judge Judy remained seated, not out of defiance, a quiet reckoning. Her fingers, once tapped with certainty, now curled gently around the edge of the table. Not clenched, not defensive, just gripping reality. The cameras caught it all, but by the time the studio lights dimmed and the credits rolled in silent black and white, the internet had already declared a winner, not of a debate, but of a shift, a cultural shift. The internet became a courtroom of its own, not a courtroom of law, but of legacy. Twitter turned the confrontation into a referendum, not just on Judy, not just on Denzel, but on what America wanted its moral leaders to look and sound like. In 2025, at Justice in Real Time, Judge Judy was the Old Testament. Denzel, he's the new scripture. 1.2M retweets at Public Defendering why, "I've represented hundreds of teens who never got a second chance." Denzel Washington just gave them a voice on national television. 900K likes, TikTok. When cinematic clips of Denzel's speech were overlaid with Hans Zimmer scores. Black and white filters, courtroom gavel sounds echoing in slow motion. One viral edit, titled, "When a Man Speaks Like Thunder, But Moves Like Water," had 40 million views by sunrise. Instagram Reels split-screened Judy's long silences with Denzel's steady eyes. Captions read, "The moment a legacy paused." When experience met evolution. And then the real floodgates opened. Memes and moments. Judy's iconic raised eyebrow, now replaced in GIFs with the subtitle, "Processing Defeat." Denzel's quiet line, "That's not strength, that's bullying." Immortalized in bold Helvetica across every activist's page. Merchandise launched in 24 hours. T-shirts. "Truth doesn't shout, it stands." Hoodie's legacy isn't earned by volume, it's earned by vision. Stickers and mugs. "I don't get intimidated by bullies." Even late-night shows took notice. Stephen Colbert, last night, Judge Judy met someone she couldn't talk over, and Denzel did it without moving an inch. That's not debate. That's emotional Aikido. Trevor Noah, guest hosting from Johannesburg, he didn't dismantle her. He invited her to evolve, and somehow that cut deeper. The real-world ripple effects were immediate. Law schools played the footage in ethics classes. One Harvard professor called it a case study in composure under fire. CNN's Town Hall set a new viewership record to 43 million global viewers in 48 hours. Congressional aides began circulating the transcript as a framework for new language around justice reform bills. But what came next? No one expected. Judge Judy issued a public statement, not from a press junket, not through her agent. Direct to camera, 2 minutes, unedited. Posted on her own YouTube channel, she sat at a simple desk. No robes, no bench, just her. "My life believing justice was clearest when drawn in bold lines. I'm starting to understand. Maybe it's also in the gray spaces. Mr. Washington didn't just challenge me. He reminded me that listening is part of judging, too." That clip alone minus 27 million views. Some fans defended her. Others demanded more. But most, paused because something rare had happened, the unthinkable. An icon humbled without humiliation. Meanwhile, Denzel, he didn't go on a press tour. He didn't post victory selfies. He didn't even tweet. He vanished for 3 days until a single photo surfaced. Grainy, taken by a passerby in South LA, Denzel Washington, walking alone, hoodie up at a community center. Speaking with a group of teenage boys in a circle. No cameras, no stage, just conversation. The caption, he really meant all of it. Back in New York, a podcast episode featuring Brian Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, dissected the confrontation. Denzel didn't speak at Judy, Stevenson said. He held a mirror up to the system she helped build, and when she saw herself in it, she blinked. The most chilling moment, though, came from a CNN follow-up interview with Anderson Cooper. Recounted what happened after the broadcast when the cameras were off and everyone had gone backstage. Anderson had approached Denzel. "That was extraordinary," he told him. "You really made history tonight." And Denzel, he looked up from his waterbottle.com as ever and said, "I didn't come to make history." He capped it with a single line. "I came to make room." And then he walked away. That line became a movement. #McRoom, the new rallying cry for justice reform across platforms. Posters on college campuses, murals in Southside Chicago, a documentary now in development titled Room for Justice. Weeks passed, news cycles moved on, but the confrontation, it refused to fade. In law offices, family homes, Twitter threads, and town halls across the nation, people still asked, "Did you watch it?" Because something deeper had shifted. A realization that strength doesn't always roar, that power isn't always loud, and that the most righteous voice in the room might be the one that waits, and then lands a single, undeniable truth. Judge Judy hasn't returned to CNN since she resumed her show, but something's different. More pause between her words, less certainty behind her catchphrases. Meanwhile, Denzel continued to mentor, quietly, privately, powerfully. He didn't need another mic because what he said in that one night was enough to echo for years. And in that echo, the final moment still plays. As he turned to leave that stage, notes tucked under one arm, Anderson called after him, "Denzel, one more thing. What do we call what just happened here?" Denzel paused, looked back, one eyebrow slightly raised. Then, with that voice, velvet and iron, he answered, "We call it the moment justice learned to listen." And then he was gone. Lights dimmed, and in the hearts of millions watching across the country, the verdict wasn't spoken, it was felt.